Welcome to the Seek First CEO podcast, a community for high-achieving kingdom women committed to seeking God first and keeping God first in all we do. If you believe you're called to impact the world through your gifts, then you're in the right place. Hi, friend. I'm Heather, teacher turned speaker and your host of the Seek First CEO podcast. I'm passionate about helping ambitious, servant-hearted women find their worth in whose they are, not what they do. As a certified master neuroscience life coach, I help you connect the dots between biblical principles and brain science so you can take your thoughts captive and be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I don't do surface, so we go deep here, and we talk about the stuff underneath the surface because I want to help you get to the source of your heart set and mindset roadblocks so you can have breakthrough by aligning your heart and mind with biblical truths. If your heart's desire is to grow in your relationship with Jesus while fearlessly fulfilling your purpose and calling, then let's open up the Word together and see what the Holy Spirit has to say about living your life in flow with Him. Are you ready? Then get excited for today's episode. Hello, sister friend. Welcome to the podcast. I am so excited for this episode because this actually was, interestingly enough, when I connected with our guest today, this question came up in our community about, as women, how do we understand our bodies, our hormones, our cycles, and how does that actually impact our business? And so I am so excited to bring Leisha Drews to the podcast today. She's a holistic hormone coach. She's also a registered nurse, functional nutritionist. And so she's got a lot of good, juicy stuff. This is specific for the woman. So if you're a man, this is not for you. So Leisha, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
Yeah, it was literally like a little God wink because this conversation came up in one of my masterminds, and one of the women was just talking about how she was learning about cycle syncing and how she would realize these rhythms in her business. And then literally we connected and I was like, this is perfect timing. So we are so excited for you to pour into us today. So before we get into all of that goodness, tell us a little bit about you, your background, just who you are and how'd you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so I started out. So first of all, right now, I am a mom of three. I've been married almost 12 years. It's our anniversary in 4 days. My husband just last night was like, babe, 12 years. Like, can you believe that? And I'm like, I think I've been saying it's been 12 for this whole last year. So I can believe it. but yeah, it's just kind of crazy to think about time and like, I don't know. I think time is just a weird one for me. It's like, how did this happen? But also it feels like it's been a long time.
I can so relate. I can so relate.
Yeah. So we've been married for a while, 3 kiddos. My kids are 9, 6, and 2.5. And I have, this business that I take care of women and help them with their hormones. And I started that kind of as I went to nursing school right out of high school, essentially, and started working in the hospital because I have always been really fascinated by the body. I used to be that kid who would like cut up crawdads in the backyard. I grew up in South Texas, so we had crawdads, so I'd like cut up stuff, cut up fish. I'd be like, look at this, look at the guts. Like I've always been like that. So nursing was a good fit for me. I loved learning more about the body. I've always loved talking to people, helping people. And as I worked in the hospital almost 10 years. I just kind of got this like sense of like, this isn't really where I need to be because I was feeling so discouraged by seeing people coming back again and again, sicker and sicker. And I was like, I need to get ahead of this essentially. Like I want to be working on the other side of this where I'm helping people not get this sick in the first place. And so I did some research, found some programs, went back to school to do functional diagnostic nutrition. And I really just dove in head first, essentially started working with all the people and found that I loved working with moms. I loved working with women who want to be moms because we honestly have so much power as women and moms to change the health of our whole families. When we start to change our health, our kids' health changes. Most of the time, our husband's health changes. And that truly, like, it changes our genetics. It changes the way that our grandkids are going to be healthy. And so I'm like, that's the impact that I want to make is like working with women because we have this sphere of influence. And as I became a mom, as I've like grown in my motherhood, I also just know the power of us being at capacity, like at our highest capacity and in a place where we feel good and calm and happy, for the most part. And when we're just like on this roller coaster of hormones all month long, we can't be the moms we want to be. We can't be the business owners we want to be because we're just like drug around by this hormone, roller coaster. And so that's why I started focusing in hormones along with, of course, pieces of my own story that just made me realize how important this is. But that's kind of like the quick version of why I'm here and why I love, teaching women about hormones. And I had many experiences in my teens, young 20s of like things were going on with my hormones. And I just kind of got like shut down. Or even when I first got married, I went to the doctor and I was like, I want, can I do something natural for birth control? And she was like, oh, honey, that doesn't work. Like, that's the answer I got. And I was like, okay, because that's who I was at that point. I was like 20 years old and I was like, oh, you're the doctor. Okay. And that's not who I am now, but those are experiences that I had that I don't want other young women to have. I want them to have the information and the resources to really understand their bodies so that they're not doing things out of fear.
That's so good. Yeah. I think, it's just this narrative. And I actually, because I work with women, a lot of them will say, they'll tell me something and say, oh, it might just be like, I just started my period. Like we always kind of like, we're aware that something's going on, but I don't think we're fully, like, we're not educated on what really is going on. So for just kind of like that overview of like your cycle and what is actually happening in our bodies, can you give us like I always say, so I'm a teacher by trade, and so I'm always like, I love to take complex ideas and make them really simple. So for the average person who's not a registered nurse and all the other titles you have, how can we understand like what is actually happening?
Yeah. So I love to just walk through the menstrual cycle as a whole. So that's going to be the 28, 30, 32, whatever amount of days your cycle is. I will just kind of throw out that I see in a healthy, like kind of quote unquote normal cycle. I really like to see at least 26 days from the first day of your period to the first day of your next period. I love to see a little longer than that if possible, closer to 28. And then I don't usually like to see more than about 35. So somewhere between like 26 and 35 is kind of like the healthy normal. And then, kind of the closer you get to that 28 to 30, it's going to be more optimal. But if you're like, oh, I only have a period every 2 months, or I have a 22-day cycle, those are signs that something is not quite right because you're not able to make the hormones either as often as you need to or as long as you need to, depending on the length of your cycle. So what I see, I'm going to kind of talk about a 28-day cycle and then just I know everyone's isn't 28 days, but in that first week of your cycle, so period starts and you're bleeding during that first week, essentially your hormones are going to be at their lowest level. So the hormones I'm talking about for women are estrogen and progesterone primarily. Just so you know, there's a million hormones in your body. You have a million hormones, but estrogen and progesterone are the ones we're focused on today. So estrogen is the hormone that helps make ovulation happen. And so in that first week of your cycle, you don't have much estrogen or any progesterone. And that low level is something that kind of creates a different mental state for you, a different mental emotional state. And so it's really common during your period to have lower physical energy. And I would say in a cycle that I consider like optimal or normal, it's just like a little bit less. It's not like you're laying on the couch. It's just like, I could like maybe not do 700 things today. Maybe I'll just do 600. So it's like just a little bit less and then maybe some lower social energy. And so that means like, usually you're the girl who would love to go out to dinner with your friend, but actually tonight you just want to take a bath, like that kind of thing. Or you're like, hey babe, like I need you to take dinner and bedtime and I just need to like read a book in my bed once a month. Like that's the kind of energy that kind of shows up where if you listen to that energy and give it a little space and take that evening off, I know it's hard to do, but take that evening off, you're like a new woman the next day because you're listening to what your intuition and your body is actually telling you. So a little bit lower social energy. The upside to this part of your cycle is that there's more connection between the right and the left side of your brain. So this is a really great time for planning, for analyzing, whether that's in your home or in your business. And so this could be a time if you plan it in your cycle, that like this is the beginning of the month for you, wherever you are, in the actual month where you're like, this is where I, plan my finances. This is where I do meal planning. This is where I plan for my team, whatever that looks like for you. So that's kind of the superpower in this phase of your cycle in that first week. And the beauty of that is when you have kind of that lower social energy, lower physical energy, that's something you can do by yourself. And your brain is like ready to do it. You can do it cozy in your bed. Like it's really ideal to do that during this first phase of your cycle. Then when we get into week 2, so days like 7 through 14-ish, this is where estrogen is really rising dramatically. And so estrogen is going to trigger a couple of things in your body to make ovulation happen at the end of this week. So this whole week is your body preparing for ovulation. And ovulation is kind of the crown jewel of your menstrual cycle. It's like what your body is working toward all month long, because ovulation is how you're fertile. This is how you can have a baby. And this is also how you make progesterone, which I'm going to get into in a minute and why that's so good. But as you're going into this week, estrogen rises, and you may notice this in your body by noticing that your motivation, creativity, social energy all rises. And as a business owner and just a woman, I think it's really important to know that there have been studies done that you are more energetically magnetic, attractive. Even your voice potentially could be rated as more attractive by strangers who can't see you during this phase of your cycle. So it's like very, very real that
for podcasters, we need to record
all podcast recordings
in
your follicular phase. Yeah. So in this phase, this is like really
phase called. You just said it. I missed
follicular.
it.
Follicular. Yeah. And that's because your body is creating, or you're maturing multiple eggs in each ovary during this time, but they're held by a little tiny capsule called a follicle. And so this follicle is what the phase is named for, but those are growing along with the eggs. And at the end of this phase, so right around day 14-ish, you're going to see that one of the eggs has gotten to the biggest point. Your estrogen has triggered something called luteinizing hormone, and that egg bursts through the follicle. And that's the egg that's ovulated. The rest of the follicles just kind of shrink down, go away, they're done. But that little follicle is this shining little star, and it becomes a temporary organ that makes progesterone for the rest of your cycle. So that could just be the next 2 weeks. Or if you get pregnant, it's until your placenta can take over, which is like 6 weeks to a couple months. So this little tiny little organ that God created can make a hormone that honestly is like life-changing as women. If we don't have enough of it, we have a lot of symptoms. If we do have enough of it, our metabolism, our thyroid, our energy, our creativity, like all of these things increase. So I just think that's incredibly cool.
That is so cool. Okay. First of all, I'm just sitting here like, holy moly. My mind is like, this makes so much sense. And I'm literally tracking in my own head, like, oh yeah. Okay. This is so good. I hope, man, we just need what you carry. So, okay, keep going. I'm over here like taking notes, and yes, my mind is being blown.
I know. It's just so cool. Like, why do we not all know about this? And this is,
yes,
it's a little nerdy, but still like so cool. It's happening in your body every month, hopefully.
Yeah. I think this too can give people hope. You're not crazy. And I'm sure that's something, some of the women you work with, it's like, I feel like I'm just crazy, or maybe I'm using this as an excuse, but like literally there's something going on. And if we can just wrap our head around that and really work with our body instead of, I find a lot that we're at war with ourselves, because it's almost like we feel like we're against us. But what you're sharing is how can we work together so that we are optimizing all of our stuff. Okay. All right. So we're at this day 14. We've got this, the progesterone starting to grow, which ironic enough, I was a pharmaceutical rep, and my husband and I sold, that's actually where George and I met, in pharma sales. And we sold birth control. So, and the product I sold was low estrogen. And so I do know a little bit about it from that perspective.
You do. Yeah.
I'm cracking up. I'm like, this is so funny. Okay, go ahead.
So interesting. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that later. But
I hated it. It didn't last very long.
Okay. So somewhere around day 14, that ovulation has occurred. And I actually want to back up just a tiny bit and say that a couple of things that I talked about on my podcast lately is even in like ADHD symptoms, this phase of your cycle can be like your most productive. And it's because when there is a lower estrogen in your cycle, it doesn't trigger as much dopamine release. And so, especially in ADHD, where that's, feels more obvious in your, focus, brain fog, ability to like get things done. This can be like the most not only productive, but like motivated part of your cycle, but it can feel like a very big difference. In ADHD, it's like super black and white. And I kind of have my own perspective on ADHD in women right now, where I'm just like, how could we not have it as like women business owners on our phones all the time, not sleeping, not eating, running around in circles? Like, of course. Also, though, I just want to throw this out there. If you're kind of like, I don't want to say I have ADHD, but I think I might have it, because you're safe.
That's
And that
me.
was my podcast episode. I was like, I'm not getting diagnosed.
I will not claim it. I'm not claiming, but I'm very aware that there are some things there that I
tendencies. Some tendencies. Same for me. And I do think that it has so much with how much we have to have on our plate. Also, though, something that I learned very recently is that not hypothyroid, like full hypothyroidism, but just like a little bit of slowed slow hypo thyroid function, where you wouldn't necessarily get a diagnosis of it, but that actually can really correlate with these symptoms of like just like having trouble focusing, a little bit of memory scattered, or even like walking into another room and being like, why am I here? Like that actually can come back to just a little bit of suboptimal thyroid function. So that's just another little tidbit that I'm throwing out.
Yeah, I think we're so quick to label, and I'm sure you've seen that obviously in your field. So I'm again, but I feel like what you're sharing is that there's hope. Like if we can learn, work with our bodies, our hormones, and just have a better understanding, I think that there's so much that we can do. Like God created our bodies perfect. So, okay.
Absolutely. Okay. So next phase is going to be week 3 of your cycle, essentially. And this is kind of like the post-ovulatory week. And so what happens is you've had like this huge rise in estrogen, and then it drops off really dramatically. Like when you ovulate, that estrogen drops off within 24 hours. So you see this if you are noticing cervical fluid before you ovulate, that's going to drop off and you're going to know that you've ovulated. If you want to start tracking this, the best way to track it is basal body temperatures. You can just Google BBT tracking and you'll find a million things, or I'm sure you can do it on TikTok or Instagram too. So tracking that can be really helpful if you want to know for sure when you're ovulating. But once that's happened, you're going to see in that same 24 hours, you're going to see estrogen drop off and you're going to see progesterone rise really dramatically. And progesterone is the hormone that is supposed to be dominant in the second half of your cycle. Now, if you're having a lot of symptoms like PMS, bad periods, mood swings, hormonal acne, breast tenderness, like any of the things that we kind of think are like normal as women and that maybe we would take birth control for, those are signs that your estrogen and progesterone are probably not in balance. And so that could mean that you're either making too much estrogen or not detoxing the estrogen well, or you don't have the ingredients to make enough progesterone to last you that full 14 days. A 14-day luteal phase is really ideal for all of the things that your body needs progesterone for. So if you're outside of that window or you're having those symptoms, this is probably something that's happening for you. And I actually have a hormone imbalance quiz that we're going to link in the show notes. So that will help walk you through a little bit more like, okay, which of these 3 hormone imbalances is probably my primary one? And then I'll give you a personalized podcast playlist where you can start to listen and hear a little bit more about like what's going on in your body with those imbalances. So
okay, I want to speak for a second because I think you said something that's gold. All those symptoms that we think are normal, right? That so many of us were put on birth control because that's just going to help balance you out. So is your thought or maybe philosophy or that we're not actually supposed to be experience all of those negative experiences? Like, tell me a little about that. Because I think we just accept normal sometimes, and it might not actually be how our bodies or God designed us.
Yeah. So I like to use the analogy that in a normal menstrual cycle, really like it's not meant to be anything crazy. I believe that pain-free periods, like not cramping, not laying on the couch, not having an emotional meltdown for 7 days beforehand, like that is what's actually normal. And that's what our bodies were created to do. It's just really neat. It should be a little bit more like, you're at the beach, it's a beautiful calm day and there's these like little waves rolling in. So it's not like the water is just flat and you're exactly the same all the time. There's like these little calm waves. And it's like, I had this little up where I was like a little more on it during follicular. And then I'm going to talk about this next, but like during the 3rd week of your cycle, you're just kind of more like slow and steady energy. And then you might kind of dip back down a little where you're like, I think I'd like a little time by myself. I think I'd like to take a nap a couple days at the very end of my cycle, but like gentle, calm, like nothing crazy where you have to say like, oh, it's shark week, guys, like stay away from me, or, oh, I'm on my period, I need 3 days to recover. Like that is not normal. That's signs of inflammation in the body. There's underlying issues going on that are, your body is just telling you, hey, something's wrong here. I need you to pay attention. And that's what symptoms are. And so, kind of going back to your point a minute ago, I absolutely love the idea that we can work with our bodies instead of feeling like we have to work against them. I think as women, we've just been taught you work against your body. You have a symptom, you take birth control. I don't care if you stubbed your toe or if your belly hurts, like birth control is the answer for you. We need to even out your hormones. Your hormones are bad. You're innately bad because you have hormones. Like I just feel like we've been told that. And I think that goes into so many other parts of our life. So diet culture, like you have to work against your body, beat yourself up, be mean to yourself. That's the only way to be happy because you look like you want, but then you're not really happy because you're starving and you're miserable and you still hate your body, even if it looks perfect, because it's never good enough. So we're taught to work against our bodies that way. And then I actually think that this goes into birth and motherhood as well, because we're taught you got pregnant. Oh, run to the doctor. Something's wrong with you. You need to be treated like, you're fragile. You can't do this. You definitely can't do this unmedicated. You definitely can't advocate for yourself. Like listen to the doctor, lay on your back, have a baby. And I know this sounds a little bit, harsh the way I'm saying it, but that really, I think it moves us into a motherhood where we're dependent as well. We're like the first second anything happens with our baby, we don't trust our intuition. We weren't even like fully present in that delivery process. There's just so much there where like, we're told we're not trusted as women. We can't work with our bodies. Our bodies are something to, work against, be afraid of. And then like that goes into our motherhood where we don't have our own intuition. Like, I think that's something we all have to grow into as mothers. It's just like a crazy cycle, to be honest.
This is so rich. This conversation alone could be yes, 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 yes. And it's like God didn't create us to have children, to be miserable, to, even the whole like, I need wine and I need to, that whole culture
Absolutely.
of like, motherhood's just terrible. I think that also like, wait a second, not to say motherhood does not stretch you, right? And it's very selfless, but paying attention to the fruit. And then there's always a root cause of that, right? And so from this, this is so good. We could talk a little bit about birth stories are like my favorite. My first baby,
me too.
I got an epidural. I got Pitocin, all the things, like the things that I just thought the doctors knew. And then, I kept coming across women who were doing natural births, and I'm like, I want to experience that. Like, I do think I never thought that my body was made for that, right? Just that same narrative you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And so my second and third birth were both unmedicated, natural, was definitely not laying down on my back. And so I think it's, again, what's normal, and I use air quotes, you can't quite see me, but it's like, what is normal? Is that actually God's normal, like God's original intent in his original design? So I love that, because what I see, Leisha, is that I know you're talking from this perspective of like the hormones and motherhood, but the same thing, again, it's a root belief. If you don't trust yourself, I see this a lot in the women I work with. They don't trust themselves with goals, with like everything. And it's, again, is we're at war with ourselves instead of working with ourselves. And it really, we like stop and pause. It can be broken down to exactly what you're doing, is helping us understand this is all. It starts with our insides, right? So obviously that's the heart, but even the physical parts of the hormones. I'm so thankful that you brought that up, because I think that is there's so much revelation to understand what have we been programmed to think versus what's actually possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think like looking back at, more like traditional cultures and even like what our culture used to be, like women, older women were the ones you went to for wisdom, and you were like, they were the ones who were the herbalists, and they were the midwives, and they were like just helping foster this sense of like intuition in motherhood, in just everything as a woman. And so I think that I could go so far with this, but our culture right now, where we're all taught do it yourself,
Mhm.
you're not good enough if you can't do literally everything for yourself by yourself and also like have your mascara on and like work out at this. Like you're supposed to look perfect and be perfect and all these things.
Yep.
But like, I don't know who started that, but that's a disaster. Like none of us can do that. I I say this all the time, but like I have incredible friends. I've been on like I've had the honor of like meeting really incredible women in business who have like these really huge businesses, 7-figure businesses. And like truly when you get to know them, like none of us have it together all the way. You know, and so I think it's so easy to look at Instagram and be like, oh my gosh, like their life is perfect. If I could just do XYZ, I'll be like them. And it's not to say that you shouldn't be inspired and like mentored and all of these things. Absolutely. I believe in all of that. But I think this fundamental belief that we can't trust ourselves, we're not good enough, you know, it's keeping us back as women.
Yeah.
And so I think that,
I'm going to go.
I think it goes back to all kinds of things.
You are so right. And yeah, I'm going to go here a little bit. And I think some of that, and I think from what I have seen, a lot of that can be some religion, because we're taught about how sinful we are and how evil our hearts are and all these things. And so from a Christian perspective, if we really believe that Jesus did what he did and the new blood covenant, and that he exchanged ours for his, we get to see ourselves differently. And so sometimes there's so much shame around, right? How just again, even from a faith perspective, I see it all the time. And again, if we're at war with ourselves, we cannot do the greatest commandment: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And I think
Absolutely.
we are wrestling with that. And to go back to where did this start? I am so here because I joke about this all the time with people, but I'm like, oh yeah, it takes a village. I'm still looking for mine. Where is the village? I don't, right? And so I think family, culture, like you said, that independent, it's made to look like it's super sexy, but I can tell you from my own experience, from being that independent woman who did all the things, built the 8-figure business, had everything on paper, but my insides were literally hated me because I was so stressed out. I had no social life. I had a lot of mom guilt. I mean, all like the inside, what I laid down, and bed at night and was like, how is this my life? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I agree. Wherever that started, I mean, I think from it's trauma, probably, because we're not going to older people asking for advice, but because maybe they didn't do the healing that they needed to do to be able to be the person that says, like, I was taught, don't ask advice from people that you don't want to trade places with. Well, I'll tell you, there's a lot of people that I don't want to trade places with, so I'm not going to ask you advice. But yes, oh man, this is going in all of like really juicy directions, but I think these are the conversations we need to have, because again, we walk around thinking something's wrong with us. She has it all figured out, and there's something wrong with me. And there must be something, right? And maybe it's a lot simpler than we think.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'll go back to the rest of the cycle so we can do that. But
Yes.
I want to say first, you were saying, like this like picture we get on Instagram of like the successful woman who's doing it all. We think that's really sexy. But let me tell you, from a hormone perspective, that's the biggest libido killer you can have, is being stressed out. Like, like you don't need your husband. You're not the mom you want to be. Like, and even if you have the money or the whatever, it looks good.
Yeah.
If you're unhappy, like you're saying, like that's the least sexy thing ever, actually. Like, it looks like it, but for how you feel inside is what I mean.
Yeah.
And not that you can't have success in a balanced way. I think that's absolutely possible, but I think we're all trying to find that in the way that works for us and working with our bodies, with our hormones, and not just like that fundamental belief that like it's us, something's wrong with us. I just think that that's holding us back so much. And I think that we can all relate to it. I definitely know that that's there for me a lot of the time.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point, because I started in the network marketing industry, and that's where I just I went to the top. I did it multiple times. And I see so many divorces in network marketing, so many. And I think that goes back to, right? If you are, and so many high achievers, and what I've learned is they're actually doing it out of a place of trauma. That was me. I didn't know I was I thought high achieving, ambitious, go getter. Like I thought that was just, oh, that's just who I am. And I'm just one of those people. No, I have learned through the past 5 years that I was doing all of that from a place of trying to prove my worth. I didn't trust anybody else. So I was my best provider. And again, like that's that village, right? I didn't have a village meant, and I wouldn't even let the village help even if they were there. But
Right.
God's done such a work in me. So yes, to all of that, those a lot of people you admire and maybe it looks great. Not saying that it's not possible, right? Because I think we are examples of how you can understand how to work with it and do better. But things are not always as they seem. All right, back to the phases. This is so good.
Okay.
This conversation so much. We might need to do like a part 2.
Okay. So we'll try to make this still part of the part one though, this last part of the cycle. Okay. So phase 3 is, I started on it, but let me just recap since it's been, 20 minutes ago. So phase 3, progesterone rises. That's going to hopefully stay dominant the rest of your cycle. And so I'm doing my hand like this. You can't see me, but that's what it looks like on a chart. So progesterone is a hormone that is pro-thyroid, pro-metabolism. It's going to help you detox estrogen, which is really important. So if you're not making enough and you're making too much estrogen, this is really the most common way I see symptoms show up. So this 3rd week of your cycle though is kind of this like slow and steady, calm energy. It's kind of like you had this like a little bit of more of a high where you're like, oh, I'm killing it. And then you don't crash from that necessarily in a cycle that is pretty smooth, like those waves I was telling you instead of the roller coaster. But it's just like, okay, like we're down just a little bit to more of a like, this is just almost like my most true self. And this is like, check things off the list. This is a great time for communication in your cycle. So communication with your husband, communication with your team, still podcasting. This is still a great time for podcasting because you're a great communicator. And so meetings, things like that, a really great part of your cycle because you can take that follicular week and use that like really high productivity, creativity for more of the like creating. And then you can communicate in this week of your cycle where you're just kind of like more steady. And then in week 4 of your cycle, this is where we see one more little rise of estrogen and we see progesterone start to slowly drop off. So about 2 days before your next period starts, estrogen and progesterone are going to go all the way back to their baseline. And that's going to bring, again, that kind of sense of, lower social energy, lower physical energy, preparation for your bleed. And so, for most women who are, okay, let me try again. Most women have hormone symptoms. For the women who don't have hormone symptoms, you may just notice like those last 2 days, just that little dip in like social energy, that kind of thing. What I notice in business a lot though, is that last 2 to 4 days of your cycle can be a very dramatic phase where you feel like you're doing everything wrong. Everyone else is doing everything better. Like this comparison comes up, if it's like a 5 in your life all the time, it's like a 12 and a half all of a sudden. And I've talked to other women in business who are like, what? Like, that's my cycle because it comes every month a lot of times. And it's like this, like, I need to revamp everything. And maybe it's not even in your business. Maybe it's just like, you're like, this house is a mess. I've got to, redo everything. We need to read a marriage book. I need to read a parenting book. Sign me up for all the courses like
I'm
this.
laughing. Yes.
So that happens a lot of times for us, like high achiever women in our cycle, even if we don't have the traditional PMS. But this week 4 is the week that gets the bad rap, essentially, where it's like, this is where, if you do have PMS, which I will just reiterate is not normal and you don't have to have it, this is where you're going to be irritable, cranky, cravings, bloated, all of those things. And so those are, just remember next time you have those symptoms, hey body, like you're telling me something, let me listen. Like, what are you telling me? Do I need to slow down? Do I need to eat more regularly? Do I need to eat better? Do I need more sunshine? Like these are all the things that I walk through in my program. It sounds very basic. And most of what we do truly is pretty basic, but most of us are not doing it. So in Nourish Your Hormones, I walk you through how to make hormones well and how to detox hormones well. Those are the first 2 steps out of the 6 steps. And those are the steps that I see most women need just at a baseline to be able to start to feel more like themselves. And it's really incredible once we get those steps right in a simple way that just the way that our body can respond. And then you start noticing like, wow, my body really is working for me. Like it was telling me something. And now that I'm listening, it doesn't have to tell me that anymore. So really just looking at those symptoms as your body communicating with you and having compassion for that versus just like, this is so annoying. Let me, do whatever I can to mute this word that I'm getting from my body. That's really, it can be really, really helpful. And I think that that was one of the things that changed so much for me in my nutrition journey is being able to like have compassion on my body, trust myself that if I didn't stay, 10 out of 10 strict, that I wouldn't all of a sudden gain 500 pounds. Like these trust and like listening to our bodies are just so huge. So that fourth week of your cycle, it can be the week that gets the bad rap, but if your cycle is smooth, then this is the week where you're kind of in that nesting mode. And this is great for finishing up projects. So you've done your planning in week 1, week 2, you've like done all the creative things, you've done the social things. Week 3, you're checking things off the list. And then week 4, you're looking back and you're like, what did I get done? What needs to change? This, especially, I do want to say that even that kind of like, I need to reset everything in my life feeling. If you can just like scale yourself back a little bit and be like, okay, but like actually what's true, pray through that, take some time to journal. This is a very good, like analytical, it feels a little more critical time in your cycle. But if you look at that and you're noticing every single month, you're like, wow, this is the one thing that's bothering me so much. Like you can listen to that and not just write it off as like, oh, in 2 days, I'll think this is fine. Like kind of find that balance because this is a time where you can look back and say, how did I do this month? What do I want to change? How's my team doing? Maybe I really do have some problems in my home management that need to be taken care of. Like listen to that because your body is essentially, it's kind of like a nesting phase where it's preparing to either find out that you're pregnant or find out that you're not. And you know how at the end of pregnancy, you just want to like clean, the baseboard behind the toilet that you've never looked at before. It's kind of that same, like, let's clean everything up mentality. And we can use that to our advantage.
Oh, this is fascinating. Again, I feel like this needs to be taught to every female so that, yes, we can do a lot of damage control, so good. Leisha, I am so thankful and I know we could probably go on rabbit trails on every single thing. I did. Welcome to the Seek First CEO podcast. My brain's going.
I love it. I love it.
Oh my gosh, this is so good. Okay. I know you have the freebie. We're going to link that below. I am so excited to take that quiz to see how else can our listeners connect with you, learn more about the program that you run. We'll link all that stuff below, but is there any other way that they can connect with you?
Yeah. So my favorite place to hang out is my podcast. It's called the Happily Hormonal Podcast. I have lots of episodes there. So come over there and start listening. And then I also am on Instagram, very low key, but I will answer my DMs there. So if you just want to chat, you can do that there or on my podcast. You can also send me a text on the podcast. So those would be great ways to reach out. And then I work with my clients through my Nourish Your Hormones program. And I do a little bit of limited one-on-one coaching where I can do the functional lab work. They like really deep dive. If you're that person who's like, I need the numbers. I need you to look at my things and tell me exactly what I need to do. I don't want like the general information, even though it is still what you need. Like that's my people that I do one-on-one with. And I love doing that. I love diving deep with those. So that is how I work with my clients. And that's where you can find me. So if you became a hormone nerd during this episode, then please come be friends with me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. We are totally friends. And thank you. Thank you so much. This is so good. I'm just going to have to I have a whole page of notes and I don't normally do that when I do podcasts, but I'm like,
I love that so much.
Yeah.
That's so
great.
Thank
you for pouring into us. And I can't wait to start listening to your show and more and just like understanding more of all of this.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I just had like the best 45-minute conversation. I love doing this. So thank you for doing it with me.